Over and over again, we have seen examples where indigenous peoples, as custodians of their lands, territories, and natural resources, have a certain level of knowledge that goes beyond what most of us know. So I think it's really important that companies recognize indigenous peoples and their rights for the knowledge that they have and for who they are.
Hi there, and welcome to Voices from the Institute for Human Rights in Business, also known as IHRB. I am Deborah Sager, and in this podcast, you will hear from people who are working to make respect for human rights part of everyday business. You've just heard from Tulika Bansal, a business human rights expert based in India. In this episode, you're going to hear from Tulika and Johnson Jamet. Johnson is the founder and executive director of Blue Green. Blue Green advocates for the rights of coastal communities who are affected by the construction of a megaport in Kerala, southern India. The construction of this port is directly impacting biodiversity and fishers' livelihoods. We're going to look at that example in a moment. But first, let's hear from my colleague Francis House, IHRB Senior Advisor, who is working on an initiative to bring together Indigenous leaders and companies. We'll hear about the challenges facing fisher communities in this part of the world, but how big a problem is the lack of meaningful dialogue between business and Indigenous communities more generally?
It's a common thread that we're seeing across a number of different industries and projects at the moment, and that's everything from renewable energy to large infrastructure projects, such as we're talking about here. What you're seeing is inadequate engagement very often by companies who are not undertaking meaningful dialogue and ongoing consultation with Indigenous communities. That means that they're not drawing on Indigenous knowledge, which in many cases can be extremely important to the feasibility and success of the project. They're not hearing their needs. And crucially, by not engaging in meaningful dialogue and adequate consultation, they're not securing social license to operate. So what you're seeing increasingly, and you'll hear about this in the case of the megaport in Kerala, there is growing conflict and resistance from local, often Indigenous communities to these projects. Their rights are not being respected. And from the business side, this is causing risk and additional cost to the project.
You spoke to Johnson and Tulika. Why did you want to speak to them specifically about this?
Well, as founder of Blue Green, an ocean resource centre, Johnson's got a very particular insight and expertise into how these issues are playing out. He's got a very interesting understanding, both from a scientific and a social point of view, in terms of how the rights of his community and other local communities are being infringed and what needs to be done for them to be better protected. Tulika is a business and human rights expert of many, many years standing and has worked in a number of countries and across industries all over the world. She brings a very interesting overview to this issue that I was mentioning earlier about the crucial importance of meaningful dialogue and consultation between Indigenous communities and companies around this issue of not only protection of rights of the communities, the affected rights holders, but also the earning of social license to operate for the companies.
Thanks, Francis. Let's now hear from Johnson, who explains more about the coastline in Kerala.
The Kerala coast actually is about 590 kilometers of the coastline. Seafood is the main consumption of the Kerala population. But many people here, common citizens, they do not know where these fish actually come from. The other important aspects are a lot of their human rights are not protected. For example, land rights and the traditional rights over the ocean resources. These are not protected very well. And the indigenous youths and coastal youths are not properly guided to look for new opportunities or better opportunities based on their education. There is no facility, there is no system for them to think about their own future or a kind of aspirations they like to have for future engagement with communities in different parts of the world.
So the vast majority of livelihoods in those communities is coming directly from fishing or seafood harvesting of some sort?
Yes, largely here in Kerala, nearly 200,000 active fishers, and their population will be closer to a million of fisher population in Kerala. Usually, men do fishing, and women engage in fish vending activities.
So, Johnson, the area is facing challenges due to climate change. Can you tell me about that?
There are at least three main challenges faced by the community. The first one, decreasing the fish resources. Fish stocks are not very productive as used to be, and increasing cyclones. In fact, in 2017, November, we have lost more than 400 fishermen at sea because of the Oki cyclone. That is increasing every year. Number of cyclones because of the cyclones are predicted, and fishers number of working days are going down. So if you calculate last year, roughly the fishermen got only 80 to 100 days of working days. And another challenge is related to biodiversity depletion. In some areas, they are not, but it's also partly with the human activities as well. But the fish stock depletion is one of the issues identified by several scientists for their research work. These are the main challenges, I think, in terms of climate change.
So, some really alarming trends there, which is a backdrop against which you're seeing some much more immediate challenges from commercial activity in the area. And I'm talking specifically about the Adani International Seaport in Kerala. I understand that, phase one of that port to be completed this year. We know from the media there have been long-running protests by local fishermen and local communities against the port. This is India's sort of gateway to the, very lucrative global transshipment market. So economically, important, but with some very, very serious impacts on not just the very important and precious ecosystem, but livelihoods as well. So could you just outline quickly the port activities, its sort of current impacts on local communities and coastal ecosystems already, and what you anticipate as the development continues?
Yes, this is being projected as the gateway of India in terms of maritime trade, this Vizhinjam port project. Actually, many of these projections are not accurate and scientifically no evidence, even in terms of economic realities. Number one, this post has to be finished or completed by December 3rd, 2019. They are hoping to complete by this year, but some researchers doubt about this. Even they may take even another 2 years to complete this first phase. I mentioned earlier about the Oki cyclone. Oki cyclone, when it happened, it actually destroyed more than 300 meters of the breakwater when they first constructed. So this is not climate resilient port. It is a port on the open sea. There are no natural protections surrounded by this the port development area. The port development is also happening in Vizhinjam Bay. Vizhinjam Bay is actually about 7 kilometers from Kolam to another village called Adimaluthura. In between, it's a bay. Then nearby there is a fishing harbor also. The fishing harbor used to be the safest harbor in Kerala. That is being affected because of the port development. And there are also allegations against the contract between the Kerala government and also Adani Port. There are some not good practices were followed. These allegations are made by one of the most believed system in India, which is CAG, actually made a lot of mismatches and issues with the contracts. They claim that it won't affect the coastal communities. It won't affect the beach erosion, etc. Already this area, especially the north of the port development area, considered to be eroding beach. So beach erosion is happening since the port construction. We did a collection of data, and the length of the high tide line to the landwards area, that has been reduced from 18 meter to 40 meter now. So the future climate events will not be tolerated by the sea because the natural protection mechanisms are already destroyed. And more than thousands of fishes, they lost their livelihood. They got some compensation, but they got compensation for their loss of job. But what they will do when they are not able to do the job, or when they are not able to practice their livelihood? That area is very rich biodiversity area. So these fishes were using their traditional fishing activities there for more than, many centuries. About 4 to 5 kilometers of area they have lost. These are the traditional areas of the livelihood. It's also rich biodiversity area. They destroyed more than 50% of the ecosystem. They destroyed at least 8 reef ecosystem. So these fishermen were doing fishing activities here, but now they are not able to find fishes there. They are going deeper and deeper. These traditional fishes, they are with a small craft. So they are taking risk because the fishes are not available in the coastal waters. Now they are fishing more than 80 kilometers. Again, any cyclone comes, they are on the way of the cyclone. They cannot escape. They cannot come back to the beach very quickly.
You've got this sort of deadly combination of exacerbated erosion because of the siting of the port and the infrastructure. You've got destruction of ecosystems, fishermen being pushed further and further out into deeper seas, being more and more vulnerable to cyclones and other extreme weather that's happening, because of climate change. So, Johnson, thank you so much. That paints a very sobering picture of the situation in Kerala for those communities affected by the activities of the Adani port. I'm wondering, Johnson, has there been any meaningful consultation, I should say, between representatives of Adani or other companies involved with local government, with the Kerala government, but with local indigenous communities? And are there any mechanisms for ongoing dialogue?
So as far as I know, I don't think there is a meaningful consultation ever happened between indigenous fishers and Adani or even with the Kerala state government. Before the port project implementation, they had a stakeholder consultation. I think in 2013, they did a kind of a stakeholder consultation. But it happened somewhere very far away from the fishers to join the consultation. And many fishers, traditional fishers, they are not welcomed by the people who organized this. But after the port construction, again, they were not consulted. Until now, there are a lot of demonstrations happened, protests happened. Fishers do protest when some very, very critical loss happened to them. So, for example, 3 fishers were killed at the harbor mouth of Vinyam Fishing Harbor. So, I mentioned earlier, this harbor used to be the safest harbor in Kerala because the breakwater is being constructed just north of this fishing harbor mouth. When the northwest wind comes, there are a lot of turbulence now. So one such is a combination factors also between climate change and port development here. The fishers, when they see that there is a cyclone is happening, there's a Yasi cyclone in 2021. So when they came back to the shore to escape from the cyclone, those fishers were killed at the harbor mouth. Then after these 3 fishers were killed, then they made a protest. When there is a protest, then government, some officials come to have a conversation with them. Then they will promise something, then we will do this, we will do that. Fishers say that there is no much depth in the harbor mouth because after the breakwater construction on the north side of it, the depth of the water actually went down from 8 meter to 4 meter depth, for example. Then when they explain this, then they would say, okay, we will conduct a study. I was also involved. So then we went there and have a dialogue with them. Then this scientist, so-called scientists, will come and do, okay, what's the issue? Then we'll explain to the issue. Then they say, okay, within 3 months, we will do the study. Then we will not hear anything from them. Then we will insist again, so you promised us to conduct the study and why it is happening there. But there is no study yet. Then they extend and extend and extend it. So nothing happens. Then again, fishers protest again. So that is a kind of a situation here. So there is no such a meaningful dialogue. So it's only protest-based dialogues.
Tulika, in your opinion, and drawing, as I said, on your experience from seeing this in a number of different places, what's your feeling as to what Adani should realistically have done to ensure that meaningful dialogue, meaningful consultation was part of the picture right at the outset before the project even broke ground?
So what does a meaningful engagement actually mean? I think that is really the question here. And what should Adani or any other company do before they start operations in a context where indigenous peoples are present? That is what companies should really think about. So for companies to meaningfully engage with indigenous peoples, they need to take a number of steps. I think, first of all, they really should make a commitment to respect indigenous peoples' rights. Many companies are now committing to the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and are starting to understand what this means. But it's looking at human rights, but indigenous peoples have other rights and more rights than people like you and me. So companies should understand that and should commit to respecting indigenous peoples, for example, through mentioning of indigenous peoples' rights and the different instruments, that international standards that exist, such as the ILO Convention 169 and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. By putting that on paper and having senior management buy in for this, you commit yourself to something and you can also be held accountable. So that is one. Secondly, companies should follow formal processes of consultation with indigenous peoples. So conduct environmental impact assessment and social impact assessment, following the processes as outlined in ILO Convention 169 and UNDRIP. And in the case of this project, an environmental or social impact assessment should have taken place with adequate, meaningful consultation of those fishing communities that would be impacted. Another element is training. So to be able to meaningfully engage with impacted communities before, during, and after a project, you need the right people and the people with the right skills. So to be able to engage meaningfully with indigenous peoples, you need an expert. Somebody that understands the indigenous culture, language, traditions, how the community operates, so that you can understand the impacts. And lastly, I would say that it's also important to understand that there is no such thing as one community. So you can have different indigenous communities and you can also have divisions within communities. There can be people that are in favor of a certain project for different reasons, such as employment. And you will have people that may be against a project. And as part of your engagement, you should be speaking to everybody, because otherwise there's a risk that you only get one side of the story, and that could be the side of being in favor, whereas there may be people that are impacted by the project. And maybe my very last point is that it's important to also speak to different groups within indigenous communities. So speak with women and youth and children that have a different view and that may be differently impacted by a project because of their activities or their age or their exposure to certain toxics, etc. So make sure that this engagement includes speaking to different subgroups within a larger community.
I'd like to respond to 2 points what Tulika referred here. So about the impact assessment and social assessment. They do not include the fisher community very well. Another group they excluded highly, you rightly pointed out, women are excluded from the women did not participate at all, any kind of conversation. In fact, the coastal women are the vulnerable groups impacted by the port development because when their family members, I mean, husbands are killed, for example, they become widows. I mean, they have to look after families. When their husbands don't have a job, no income. So these are the people who do the majority of the household and family related responsibilities. The other thing is the fish vending women. Fish vending women, they used to do fish vending earlier, collecting fishes from the village because the indigenous community here, they follow village-based fishing activities. So each village will be their operational area, not harbor-based fishing. So women have a lot of say there. Women go to the beach and collect fish and sell them. So after the port development, because the beach erosion happened, there are no village-based fishing is not possible. So these women, they are not able to buy fish from their own villages. They have to go to harbors now. But when they go to the harbors, there are big merchants and other mainly men dominate there. So they are not able to do their employment activities now. That's one thing. About the environment impact assessment, there are plenty of studies say that this is one of the critical areas. This is an area of outstanding natural beauty.
You paint a very stark picture of the fact that there is very credible research and the facts are being ignored for political or commercial convenience and expediency. I wanted to conclude clearly. Huge damage has been done. There has been tragic loss of life, but this port is happening, and therefore, one call to action that you would like to see, Johnson, from the company in terms of a responsible way forward in terms of dialogue with the community, and then Tulika, I'll come to you.
Earlier also, people were asking this. When they did more than 140 days of protests, one of the demands was that indigenous science should be there as part of any scientific studies. After the protests by the fishers, the government promised that they will conduct a study. That's the first thing they should do. The second thing they have to admit that there is impact. Any port development anywhere in the world, there is some impact. At least they have to do an independent study. Some independent organization or institute monitored study, like maybe UN, for example, or UNESCO, any IOC, any people who are very credible. So that's the thing. Another important thing is that in order to have this dialogues should happen between the fishers and Adani Group and also the state government of Kerala. Before the port construction, they promised 475 crores rupees for rehabilitation of the coastal community, anticipating that there will be several villages will be affected, impacted by the port development, beach erosion will happen, but none of the amount, a single penny of that amount has not been spent yet. About 20-25 families are actually given some kind of support or provided accommodation. And after the protest, they also provide them some monetary support, providing the rent because they stay in a rented house. So the rent will be given by the government. So this only happened after the protest. So don't wait for the protest. Anticipate the issues and do what they should do. Keep the promise. Whatever the promises you made to them, keep them. And it should not be delayed justice. Do the necessary actions you promised. That's what Adani and government of Kerala should do.
There's some very, very clear pointers and recommendations and incredibly important lessons there, Johnson. Don't wait for the protests, anticipate the issues, do what they should do. You've talked about responsibility, accountability, lack of it. Involve indigenous science in the studies and admit impacts, look for what's appropriate remedy. Tulika, all of that will be familiar to you, I'm sure, from the work that you've done on these issues. A response to Johnson's sort of roadmap forward, and, if you were to have a call to action to Adani Group and other companies, involved in this project or indeed in similar ones, what would it be?
So my call to action really complements what Johnson said, and it would really be to not see indigenous peoples and others impacted coastal communities, artisanal fishers, as a threat to their activities and their operations, but rather see them as people that can provide something in addition. So over and over again, we have seen examples where indigenous peoples, as custodians of their lands, territories, and natural resources, which includes the ocean, have a certain level of knowledge that goes beyond what most of us know. So they know about natural resource management, biodiversity, climate change mitigation, and who knows better what the impacts are on your community than you yourself. So I think it's really important that companies show respect for and recognize indigenous peoples and their rights for the knowledge that they have and for who they are. And that means, consulting, engaging meaningfully, seeking consent, and communicating with them in a way that is beneficial to the impacted people and to the company.
Well, I think you've summed it up beautifully there, Tulika. This and it cannot be overstated, and it needs to be said again and again and again with the right people in the room. This critical importance of including and drawing on individual knowledge, whether that's around biodiversity protection, mitigation of climate impacts. But as you say, it is talking to people whose rights are directly affected, whose livelihoods are directly affected by these activities, cannot be shortcut. And Johnson, as you've said, it can't be reactive waiting for protests. It has to happen proactively in the way that both of you have so eloquently laid out. So I just want to thank both of you so much, not just for the incredibly important work you're doing in this area, but also for taking time to give us an insight into a fascinating, beautiful part of the world, but with some very serious challenges. So thank you both so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having us, Francis.
Thank you, Francis.
Some really clear calls to actions from Johnson and Tulika there. Thank you to my colleague Francis for bringing us that interview. And thank you for listening to this episode of Voices, which is brought to you from the Institute for Human Rights in Business. Until next time, though, be sure to share and follow this podcast. That way you will never miss an episode. And if you would like to find out more about the work that we do at IHRB, then head to ihrb.org.